The end of a decade. That's something that only happens once every, I'm gonna say 10 years. The math is still out, but yeah, pretty nuts. When it comes to the movie industry, 10 years is a crazy long time. A lot can happen and a lot can change. Trends come and go, new visionary directors emerge, special effects get a whole lot better. You're looking at a whole new cinematic landscape at the end of each decade. But things like that don't just happen on their own. There are movies along the way that shape things and influence the industry. Usually they do this by being massively successful. Then the industry as a whole is like, oh, they made money doing that thing. Maybe we should try doing a thing like that. Or sometimes they influence the industry by being such disastrous failures that people go, okay, maybe we actually should not make that anymore. Let's stop that kind of movie. So today I'd like to take a look at some of the movies that shaped the 2010s, which projects sent us on this path that we're now embarking on in the 2020s. First of all, maybe the most obvious entry here, the Avengers in 2012. This thing shaped the decade in several ways. I mean, now we're already used to seeing several movies within the Marvel Cinematic Universe every single year, but in the early 2010s, the concept of an interconnected movie universe of that scale was pretty unheard of. I'll admit personally, I hadn't even really heard of the Avengers when they announced that movie. I didn't necessarily love the first Thor movie or the first Captain America movie. I hadn't even seen the Hulk movie. Comic book fans were fully aware of what was being attempted there though, and they were seemingly cautiously excited. Theories started popping up, Easter eggs and nods were planted in the solo films, it became a whole thing. And then it worked a lot.
Whoa, you're the Avengers!
It was a massive hit. It made $1.5 billion, which changed a lot of stuff in Hollywood. One massive thing that the Avengers did was show movie studios that money could be made off of cinematic universes. And personally, I will say that I think that was pretty detrimental to the film industry in the 2010s. And that's not saying anything bad about the quality of Marvel movies, so don't write angry comments right now.
I'm always angry.
But the effect that they had on the industry in the 2010s, so many movies after the Avengers seem to be trying to plant the seeds of cinematic universes. And in a lot of those movies, you wouldn't get satisfying answers to things. Things would happen, but then they would be intended to start a cinematic universe, so it would be like, okay, I guess that'll pay off in a couple years if this works. And it almost never did pay off, because there were a lot of failed attempts to get these things going. The Dark Universe was supposed to be a cinematic universe of horror movie monsters. They had Russell Crowe as Dr. Jekyll being like a Nick Fury type, that bombed hard. Sony tried to get things going with like an Amazing Spider-Man cinematic universe too. In the Amazing Spider-Man 2, they planted a bunch of seeds that never paid off. Felicity Jones was in it a bit as the woman that would eventually become Black Cat. The Ravencroft Institute was introduced. The Sinister Six were teased. All that was scrapped. And famously, Marvel's main competition, the DC Extended Universe, has had kind of a rough time. A lot of those movies have been very divisive. They tried the whole Justice League team-up thing. It made less than each of the solo movies. They planted seeds in Batman v Superman that were never paid off, and because the solo films made more than their team-up film, it seems like that's what they're going to be focusing on now. So in terms of cinematic universes, Marvel's success made every producer in town go, well, I mean, we have to try, right? I mean, what if? And all of those what ifs, all those failed attempts led to a lot of mediocre stuff this decade. Another way that the Avengers influenced cinema in the past decade is in its use of humor and basically overall snarkiness.
It was a bad joke.
This was also still in a time when Christopher Nolan's Batman movies were like the coolest thing in the world. Being gritty with superhero movies seemed to be the way to go, and studios were trying this gritty reboot strategy with a bunch of properties. But then Marvel came around and started cracking jokes, and that worked really well. Lots of movies started to adopt similar tones to Marvel movies, some really intense VFX-heavy action scenes sprinkled in with characters throwing one-liners around.
Where are you from?
Nowhere.
No one's from nowhere.
Jakku.
Alright, that is pretty much nowhere.
Don't get me wrong, that can be fun to watch, and it is a lot of the time. But the so-called Marvel formula has also received a lot of complaints from people online for being, well, just that, a formula. Okay, now shifting gears away from the influence of Marvel, next up let's talk about some movies that influenced the horror genre and turned it into something a lot more, I guess, serious and respectable than it was in the 2000s. Because let's be honest, for the most part, the 2000s, that wasn't the best decade for horror. There were a couple of really good ones, but there were a whole lot of movies that were just attempting to find a formula that worked and then sticking with that formula until it didn't work anymore. Like Saw worked well, and so they just started churning them out every single year. Same for Paranormal Activity, a movie that came out in 2007 and then had a bunch of sequels trickling into the early 2010s. There was a lot of just gory, gross out horror, a lot of movies that were just straight up remakes of Japanese movies. I don't know, not the best. But progressively through the 2010s, the horror genre was molded into something a little different. There were some really good ones. They became original dramas almost, with actual real social commentary and good storytelling. One of the most popular ones was Get Out. This was a movie essentially about racism in America, and Jordan Peele won Best Original Screenplay at the Oscars for it. For a horror movie, that's amazing. A Quiet Place from Big Tuna did really well too, and was like a really well-respected piece of cinema. Bird Box was another hit on the Netflix side of things, and Ari Aster did some really cool stuff with Hereditary and Midsommar. The reason that these movies were so influential is that they allowed filmmakers to tell their stories using a genre that's one of the few remaining ones that people actually go out to movie theaters to see. And not only do they get people to go to theaters, they cost a lot less than big blockbusters to put together. From a studio perspective, that's a massive win. Even if they make one and it doesn't get the success or the critical acclaim that Get Out did, it's going to be a safer risk to take than a lot of other movies, and so in the next couple years we're going to be seeing a lot of these kinds of movies coming out. Like a lot, probably, and hopefully some of them will be good. Other than that, I'd say that 2015 was a pretty massive year for revivals, and there were two big players that kind of changed the game: Jurassic World and Star Wars The Force Awakens. Sequels and reboots have obviously always been a big thing in Hollywood, but these movies really kicked things up a notch. They were both kind of reboots and kind of sequels. They both had very specific elements that gave us something new and modern and VFX heavy, while also tapping into our nostalgia pretty hard. They introduced us to new characters who were also familiar with the events of the older movies we had already seen. They both also had elements from those original movies, but like kicked into high gear. The Empire was now the First Order, Jurassic Park was now Jurassic World, the Death Star was now Starkiller Base, the T-Rex was now the Indominus Rex. They also brought back characters from the original movies who were still played by the same actors, and these characters were there but not the main focus, so that hopefully the new characters could shine and people could get attached to them. Jurassic World brought back B.D. Wong from the original, and the second one brought back Jeff Goldblum, kind of, for one scene. The Force Awakens brought back Han Solo and Chewie and Leia and Luke at the very end. That's something we're going to be seeing a lot more of going into the 2020s. Terminator Dark Fate just used this exact formula, introducing new characters but bringing back Arnold Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton. The Ghostbusters reboot is bringing back the original cast, but they don't seem to be the main focus based on the first trailer. Even the third Jurassic World movie is going to bring back Jeff Goldblum, Sam Neill, and Laura Dern. So yeah, I'd say strap in for a lot more sequel, reboot, revival type things. And finally, we can't talk about the 2010s at the box office without talking about Disney remakes. Man, did they fall in love with making those. This all started in 2010 when they made Alice in Wonderland, which made over $1 billion at the box office. They liked the sound of that billion number, and so they decided to chase that feeling by setting out to remake every animated classic in their library. And you know what? It kept working for the most part, right up until the end of the decade, right up till now. Maleficent was actually a fresh take on an animated classic, using characters from their original animated movie and offering it up from a new perspective. But from The Jungle Book onward, they seem to go for more of a if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach to these things. Beauty and the Beast in 2017 was a massive success, but it was pretty much Beauty and the Beast again. It had updated animations and some live action actors. By 2019, they were all in on this strategy, and for the most part, it worked really well. For them, I mean, not for cinema itself, I guess. With Dumbo, they tried to build something off of the original, but the original was so weird that it didn't work. They couldn't remake that one beat for beat because it was insane. But Aladdin in 2019 made over $1 billion by going beat for beat. The Lion King made over $1 billion by going beat for beat. So as you can see, I mean, the decade was heavily shaped by Disney and what made them money. Personally, I'm not sure the influence was such a good thing in terms of the cinematic landscape, you know, a lot of remakes and a lot of formulaic VFX heavy stuff. But with the rise of streaming in the past few years and more content being made than ever, we're definitely heading into an interesting time in the 2020s. Thanks for watching that video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think some of the most influential movies of the decade were? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. If you did enjoy this video, please consider hitting the subscribe button, and as always, check back soon for a new video.